Jimmy Greene, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. You were talking a little bit just before we got started about some advice that you have given your students about uh, what's going on and getting stuff done and things.
Yeah, I was sharing that initially when it was announced, after spring break, mid March, that we weren't going back to campus. I teach at Western Connecticut State University in Danbury, Connecticut. Once it was announced that we weren't going back to campus, and that everybody's going to be home pretty much, the first thought is, well, especially among some of my students, I can get so much done, at home. Like I'm not, I don't have to go to class or drive. Some of them live off campus, drive back and forth, and get caught in commuting time and all that. Uh, and I said to them, that's great. Take advantage of this situation to do all that you can. However, also realize that this dealing with this, if you become ill, if you know someone who's ill, or even just dealing with the news and learning how to like wash your groceries and all that stuff that we've had to learn how to do,
Yeah.
and how many times a day you need to be washing your hands, and if you get an Amazon package, well, how do you deal with that.
Yeah.
So just learning this kind of all this information that we've had to learn in a moment's notice, it takes a toll. It takes a physical toll. It takes an emotional toll. So be gentle with yourself. If you don't get everything done on your to-do list, it's all good. As long as you're breathing and you're healthy and you're staying productive, if you get 8 things done on your 10 thing to-do list, don't beat yourself up over the last two.
That's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah, it is
Eighty
pretty good.
percent would be pretty
Yeah, it
good.
is. Yeah.
Um, so was trying to think. It seems like we met once before, maybe like at an IAJE
I
conference.
remember
This is
that. Yeah. In
yeah, long
Chicago, maybe like way back
yeah,
in the day.
yes,
Like
yes, that's right.
97, something like that. 98,
Yeah,
96, maybe 96, 97, something like that.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, and yeah. So and it seems like we have some people in common.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, Quincy Davis, for instance. Um, Quincy and I interviewed him as part of the series.
That's great.
Um, but Quincy and I, we went to college together, did our undergraduate degrees together at Western Michigan University, and yeah, Quincy is such a, um, you know, I remember the first time I heard Quincy. Um, he was in a practice room,
Uh,
uh, and it was in a rehearsal, but it was like this practice room, so it was kind of tight in there. But
mm-hmm.
I just remember hearing something like, it was swinging so hard. I just had to. I had to go and I just opened the door like, what is going on? you know, and then that was the end. And
That's Q. Yeah. We my introduction to him was right after he finished at Western Michigan, and he moved to New York. I had been playing and been good friends with his older brother Xavier for some time. Xavier and I met when I first moved to New York. That was in '97, and we had played together in this group called the New Jazz Composers Octet. And then starting in 2000, I joined Tom Harrell's quintet, which he had just reformed, and Xavier was playing in it as well. So Xavier and I had played together, known each other for several years, and then Quincy moved to town around 2000 or so, 2000, and he joined Tom's band not long after that, around 2000, 2001. And man, so much fun on the road with Q and X too, both of them, and just what a lovely human being Quincy is. Dave too. I mean, they're both awesome human beings. And Quincy and I, we played together in Tom's group till uh, 2005, end of 2005, I think. And then we played together in New York here and there after that. And then I moved up to Winnipeg in 2009 with my family, and I took a position at the University of Manitoba. And who comes up and takes the drum position a year later but Quincy Davis? So we
Yep.
got to hang up in Winnipeg for a couple of years before I left and came back here. And now he's in North Texas. So yeah, I've become good friends with Quincy over the years. And I just saw him, as a matter of fact, in Detroit at the Jazz Festival. Well, it seems like just yesterday, but it was in September. Already it's been several months. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting the sense of time right now. Um, in one sense, uh, things that only happened a couple months ago seem like they were forever ago because so much has changed
Yeah.
in the just the dynamic of things. But then, there is that sense that, um, at least in my mind, things that occurred before that, or a good amount before that, that stuff seems like it's closer for some reason.
Yeah. Strange. Every day
Yeah,
seems to melt into the next. It's
right.
kind of hard to keep your sense of perspective on time because you wake up at home, you go to bed at home, and you really don't leave much. At least I don't. You don't leave much in between.
Yeah, I have a 6 year old. His name is Moses,
Mm-hmm.
and Moses is trying to eat us out of house and home, and he's in kindergarten.
That's great.
Of course, we're doing the homeschooling thing now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that uh, basically he's getting two more meals at home than he ordinarily would get.
Mm-hmm.
So he would, I mean, he would always do breakfast and dinner at home,
Mm-hmm.
but he would get lunch plus like some kind of snack.
Sure.
And I'm telling you, that lunch plus a snack is adding up. Uh, I am. This boy's got to be eating a lot more than he was. I feel like I'm at the grocery store every other day.
Yeah,
I'm
man.
like, come
Yeah.
on, man, crazy stuff.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. He's supposed to be eating and have good appetites. That's a good thing.
Yeah. And we were talking. You were talking about Xavier and Quincy. Um, I brought them both to Columbus to
Mm-hmm.
be featured, guest artists for our jazz festival.
Mm-hmm.
Which unfortunately this year, along with so many other things, have been canceled. I had to cancel that festival. Um, but Xavier was it last year, and then I think the year before that, Quincy, and such a musical family they're from.
Yeah.
Now you were talking about playing with them with Tom Harrell.
Yeah.
Um, what was playing in Tom Harrell's band like?
Oh my goodness. Wow. What an education. I love to write. So uh, there's no finer composer, uh, than Tom. His compositional palette, it's a very broad one. Like he can write the most kind of diatonic, lullaby-like melodies, and these very calming, soothing tunes. And he can write, you know, some very jagged, angular, dissonant harmony with, kind of 12 tone underpinnings, and he can write everything in between. Some real swinging, bebop oriented tunes, and some, Brazilian, or some, odd meter, or it's just a very broad palette of music that, is very valid in his hands. It's not like he's, toying with any of it, or nothing ever sounds trivial. It's always really well crafted, and it kind of plays itself in a lot of ways. He's and what an amazing instrumentalist too. I remember we speaking of Xavier and Quincy, there was a record that we did. It was the first record that we did as a quintet. It was I think it's just called Tom Harrell Live at the Village Vanguard. It's from 2001. And there was one night, he played a ballad every night. Everything Happens to Me, I think, most nights, and maybe he played Darn That Dream a couple other nights. But there's one night, on that bench, that red leather bench on the side of the bandstand, I sat there while, he was featured on his ballad, because I didn't play. It was his, it's his feature, just playing with the rhythm section. And I sat there and thought to myself, I can't believe all the beauty that's coming out of this man's horn right now. It's just such a pretty sound, such a warm, pretty sound, and such, beautiful melodic and harmonic development going on at the same time. And just, what a wonderful musician. So I learned a lot about composition and about just about playing, standing next to Tom every night. It's pretty cool. And then Xavier and Quincy playing together, and Ugono Kegwo, it felt a lot like family, Well, Xavier and Quincy are family, but hanging on the road, like we never, a lot of times on the road, you kind of do your own thing and don't necessarily have every meal or whatever with the rest of the band. But in that group, it's like we always wanted to hang together. If someone was doing something, we'd all do it, and that's kind of special.
Yeah.
Tom wouldn't do it a lot of times. He and Angela kind of wouldn't necessarily. Angela would come and kind of hang out with us. Angela is Tom's wife and his manager too, so she goes on the road with him wherever he goes. So during that time, yeah, she would come and hang and go out to meals. Tom liked to kind of stay to himself, maybe stay in his hotel room and or whatever. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, a lot of learning during those years.
So was the band um, the way that Tom sort of had was it more of a like a set thing that was happening, or was it more of an open kind of vibe, or like what was the chemistry like, and what was his expectation, and like what does he want out of the band?
It's a great question. Tom never said one word about what he wanted to hear, about what he wanted us to what he never explained any song. He never said a word about any piece of music that we played. He'd write it out, and his penmanship writing music is pristine. Like I think he uses like, and he at this time, I'm not sure. I haven't played with him in 15 years, but during those days, he was not using music notation software, Finale or Sibelius or whatever. He was writing it all out by hand, and it was really meticulously done, very, very neat. He'd write out these parts for us, and that was it. Once it was there, that's what we played. We would rehearse it, and the rehearsals were essentially just run-throughs. He wouldn't stop the group and say, okay, let's take it again from here, and I want to hear this, and that. No, it was just a run-through. If one of us made a mistake or was confused about something, we'd say, oh, Tom, can we go back and run through this again, or whatever. But we play the music until we'd rehearse it or run it through until we felt comfortable. And then that was that. We'd play it, and when we played it, we played a lot. He depending on the tour or the whatever, if we were playing, for example, for a week at the Vanguard, we pretty much play the same 12 tunes all week. So we get to know them really well. If we're on the road, we pretty much play the same. Yeah, there weren't many new things introduced. Once Tom had decided on what he wanted to play, then that's what we were going to play for that tour. So we could pretty much settle in and just hone in on those tunes, But like I said, he never talked to us about, okay, I want you to think of this when you're playing it. Never. And what that made me feel like is that he really trusted us with his music, and he really kind of enjoyed seeing what we brought to the table, and he, like I said, he never said a word in 5 years of playing with him. Never, never said a word. So we'd play the same sets, pretty much. Like, it brings to mind one week we played at the Jazz Showcase in Chicago, 6 nights, Tuesday through Sunday. But Sunday, there's, Tuesday through Saturday, there's 2 sets a night. So we had the 2 sets written out on a piece of paper. Tom wrote it out for us, the order of the tunes or whatever. So that's what we played, every night, first set, second set. Sometimes he reversed the order, maybe play second set first, but the tunes were pretty much set. So on Saturday, in those days, there were 3 sets. One was like an afternoon matinee at 4 p.m., so it got to be Saturday night, and we played our 2 sets. And then Sunday, we show up, maybe an hour before the matinee set, just to get ourselves, together and warm up and, whatever. And Tom, for whatever reason, wasn't around, but Angela was. I guess Tom was going to come like right before the show or whatever. And we asked Angela, did Tom mention what he wanted to play for this afternoon set? She said, no, I didn't. I don't know. He never mentioned it. He didn't, I'm not sure what he wants to play. So we're like, okay. It's not like him. We're probably not going to repeat one of the evening sets. So what is this afternoon set? So we kind of talked amongst each other. And I remember this particular week, Ugona couldn't make it. So Dwayne Burnell substituted for him. So Dwayne was on the gig, and me and Zave and Quincy. So we didn't know what we were going to play. So it gets to the time of the show, and Tom is finally there. And no one said anything about what we just walked up on stage, and Joe Siegel at the time did his announcements, and we had no idea what was going to happen, which was scary in a way, but also kind of exciting because we never really had that experience with Tom. We always knew exactly what we were going to play in what order, and he'd count off the first tune, and that's what it would be, So all of us were on the edge of our seats. Joe finished his announcement, at the beginning of the set. And so I'm just staring at Tom, who's right next to me on my left. And he has his trumpet up to the mic. And he starts playing. And I was like, Whale, Bud Powell, I know that. So bam, jump in. And everybody else heard E-flat rhythm changes. All right. Oh, we figured that one out. So he didn't call Whale. He just started playing the melody. And at that moment, Sean, I was thanking God for Jackie McLean. Because when I was at Heart, all those tunes, Bud Powell, Monk, all those tunes, Bird, those were our like weekly diet. That's what we shedded on. That's what in his masterclass, in his weekly saxophone masterclass, those are the tunes we played, Miles. So we had a lot of those tunes together. So the second, after Whale was over, Tom didn't say a word. He just put his trumpet to the mic. And what did he play? Do 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 dee da boo wee da do wee dum. Boo do do boo wee. If you could see me now, Tad Dameron. It's like, yes, got that one too. All right. Thank you, J Mac. Played that one. And then it was like, what was it? A couple more. It was like a entire set of bebop repertoire, and he never called the tune. He never told us what it was going to be. He just trusted us to know it. And thank God we all did. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. So I tell that to my students now, who most of them really embrace the challenge of playing that repertoire. But some of them kind of look to what's going on now, and they might not grasp how important that repertoire is to informing what's going on now. So I always tell them that story, just as an aside, like, this is stuff that pretty much everybody that plays the music you want to play, a lot of them have this repertoire together, if not most. So you should get it together,
Yeah, and none of us got into the game to play scales.
Right.
It's to play tunes.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. It's to play music. So that's got to be a primary consideration. It's got to be the main thing that you're working on. I mean, all of the other stuff is just so that you can speak intelligently, over tunes.
There you go. There you go.
That's the reason for everything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to clarify ideas and work out concepts, but all that stuff is going to take place on tunes.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah, repertoire. That's it's also like it's how we have topics of conversation. It's like if you go in a room full of which I've been in my younger days and kind of felt, man, I gotta do some more reading. Like in a room full of intellectuals, like we're very well read people, and you don't all know the same books. You didn't read all the books they read, so you have very little to talk about.
Right.
It's like that. But if it's like going to a jam session, not knowing any tunes, well, you're not gonna be able to have fun. You're not gonna be able to participate. But if you know a good amount, not no one knows every tune, right? But if you know a good amount of tunes, then you're gonna be able to have, you're gonna be able to converse with whoever's there. Pretty much. So.
Now speaking of jam sessions,
Mm-hmm.
uh, have you noticed a sort of regional favoring of certain tunes? Like if you were to go to a jam session in Chicago
Mm-hmm.
versus one in New York versus one in, I don't know, somewhere in the Midwest
Mm-hmm.
or something, somewhere in Detroit or something.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a regional sort of certain tunes that get called more often?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the uh, the example that comes to mind quickest is New Orleans. I played in Harry Connick Jr.'s band for some time. He's a good friend, a great guy. And going to New Orleans, like for the jazz festival or to record down there, which we did, and going to a session like at Tipitina's or I forget where else we went. But yeah, Little Liza Jane and Panama and After You've Gone. Uh, and those are tunes, those are tunes you wouldn't necessarily hear in a New York jam session, where you're going to hear Stablemates and you're going to hear All the Things You Are, and you're going to hear, Moment's Notice or whatever. So yeah, there is a difference. I've noticed internationally though, like playing jam session in a jam session setting, like an example that comes to mind is I did some clinics and concerts in Israel at the Ramon School of Music and right outside of Tel Aviv, and they pretty much knew all the New York standards, that you would hear in a New York jam session. The faculty there knew those tunes. So and I had that experience in Canada too, living in Canada for 3 years. Like tunes that would be happening in New York are happening there too. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
when we go throughout the country, yeah, New Orleans in particular, there's a different set of tunes that everybody kind of references.
And of course, we're talking jazz wise, but obviously, um, the sort of common tunes would be different. Like for instance, uh, in a black church, the tunes that everybody just knows,
Mm-hmm.
the hymns that everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've noticed that on your Facebook, you've been doing, was it like a hymn a week?
I did for some time, for about a month. I did a hymn every Sunday. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get back to that this coming Sunday. I've been pretty swamped the last several weeks, but I think Easter was the last one I did. But I'm definitely gonna get back to that.
So what kind of gave you the idea to do that?
Cyrus Chestnut. I saw right as the quarantine began. I saw Cyrus post something on either Instagram or Facebook saying, I'm going to play some hymns this Sunday, or just something real simple like that. And I was like, wow, what a great idea. So he had like a half hour concert in his house, just him playing, a bunch of hymns back to back. I was like, I like to do that. So I just did, instead of doing a bunch or half an hour, I just did one a week for like 4 weeks. And then I did do a half-hour concert. Jazz at Lincoln Center asked me to do a half-hour Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola set. They call it jazz from home or jazz at home. So I did one of those. But leading up to that, I did several, just one hymn, very short, little Facebook things and Instagram things.
Now, hymns, it seems to me that maybe hymns to you mean something deeper than just the melody.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It's, for people of faith, a hymn is music is much more than notes and rhythms and harmonies and melodies and motives and counterpoint and all. Music is the way that humans can communicate, where words just aren't sufficient. It's like it's a very intense way of communicating. So it's no wonder that, like you said, if you step into a black church or any church, the way that we all communicate in our most intense way to God is there's music involved in it. There's sound, there's a sense that this music is not just there for entertainment, it's there for offering praise. It's there for communicating that. So for me, yeah, the hymns, they're much more than the lyrics or the melody. It's the sense of worship that happens, through them, that is the most powerful thing.
Yeah, something that's interesting. I wrote a black gospel setting of an Orthodox Vespers,
Mm.
and it was 8 singers, SATB, 2 on a part, B3 organ percussionist, and one of the reasons I wanted to do that, I'm Orthodox. I didn't grow up Orthodox or anything, but one interesting parallel between the Orthodox Church and black church, but in particular, like maybe like AME or Missionary Baptist, but really it's kind of it seems to be a black church aesthetic is to be a lot more reverential about formality.
Mm.
So there's tends to be a more developed liturgy.
Mm.
There's tends to be more respect of pastors and clergy. So, like for instance, if I was to go, and this is not to knock anybody, it's just interesting sort of comparisons. So if I was to go to, like for instance, like an evangelical church, like a kind of a guitar-driven evangelical, mega church,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, they might call the pastor by his first name,
Mm-hmm.
right? That wouldn't necessarily be so in a black church,
Oh no,
right?
not
And
in my
I think,
experience. No.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and but another thing that's interesting. So if you were to go to a Southern Baptist church versus like a Missionary Baptist church, the Southern Baptist church would tend to the music would tend to be sort of segregated from the service in the
Mm.
sense that it would occupy a particular place
Mm-hmm.
in the service, but it wouldn't necessarily be intertwined and
Mm.
ever present through the entire service, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the black church, the music is happening the whole time. It's the only time that the music isn't happening is like during the sermon, but then it is at the end of the sermon, as you know.
It sure is. It sure is. Yeah.
Which is, there's a direct parallel between that and Orthodox Church or Catholic Church,
Mm-hmm.
where uh, you talk about like chant, or you talk about masses, early mass being set to a tone,
Mm-hmm.
and everything is sang.
Mm-hmm.
It's because music is sort of accompanying all of the content is
Mm-hmm.
is musical,
Mm-hmm.
and our churches tend to be that way too,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is um, which is interesting because I I don't know that I don't know that we knew that per se,
Mm.
but it just seemed to be sort of a natural outgrowth of
Yeah.
our culture,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and how important I think music is to our culture.
Yeah. Absolutely. I th- uh, I was sharing this with some students earlier. We were talking about John Coltrane's quartet, and I said, um, I've said this several times, but there's something on YouTube. There's a sermon by a pastor who's close to our family. I actually grew up with his kids. Um, we went to high school together actually. The pastor's name is Leroy Bailey Jr. And there's a record, like a record, like a vinyl record from 1974 that one of his sermons was recorded. It was at the time he was the pastor of First Baptist Church in Hartford, Connecticut. And years later, another much larger church was built, a few miles away, and it's called the First Cathedral. It's a very huge. I think it might be the largest non-denominational Protestant church in New England.
Mm.
So anyway, but back in 1974, he had just come up from Tennessee, I guess, and he gave this sermon called "The Woman I Love Just Don't Treat Me Right." He was talking about the book of Job. And if you ever, I told my students, if you ever want to see or hear, when when music, how big of a part music is, and how much parallels are between performing and a great sermon. Listen to this. I mean,
Mm.
the call and response, all the elements of African American music are there. Call and response, the building up of emotion, and then when the sermon reaches its peak, obviously the music comes back in. It's a very gradual process, but Pastor Bailey goes from speaking to singing.
Oh yeah.
It's not all at once. It starts very subtly, but it just grows and grows, and by the end, like he's singing. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And on a spiritual level, it's amazing. On a, I guess an ethnomusicological level, it's amazing too. Just witnessing how the culture and the music and the sound, are it's like one and the same thing, and it's pretty awesome to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I I work at a missionary Baptist church, and the pastor, who's a fine teacher and preacher,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a great singer,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's a regular experience we have.
Yes.
Towards the end of the towards the end of the sermon, um, and so the organist, we kind of know what key he's going to start in,
Mm-hmm.
and we know what his vocal range is,
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of know, not to start too high so he doesn't have anywhere to go. And yeah, it's like there's so much beauty in that. And you were talking about the call and response. Again, in an Orthodox setting, the call and response is between the priest, who's the worship leader, and the congregation, right? And you have all this really intricate interaction that's going on. In a black church, you have that interaction. You also have the interaction between the preacher and the congregation as they're responding to what it is that he's preaching about.
And also the other elders and the deacons, who are up close to the pulpit, that call and response is there too. It's just
You know,
there's just a lot of interaction going on.
yeah, it's very
Music is something
musical.
else, man. Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's very musical.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so tell us how you grew up. Tell us about your home life growing up. Um, Tell us about what drew you to music
Mm-hmm.
and the saxophone in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of sounds and things were happening around the house,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe some early mentors and that kind of stuff.
Well, my dad had played saxophone. He grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and he had played saxophone in junior high school and a little bit in high school. He tells a story. There was a young lady that he was really interested in. This is about, uh, maybe halfway through high school. And she said, "Well, I'm much more interested in guys that are on the football team than I am than guys who are in the band." So he started playing football at that point. But he had played enough saxophone, and he was a really good football player too. He went to Tuskegee Institute, and if you look at their media guide, they put out a media guide maybe 5 years ago. He was listed as one of the best tight ends in the history of Tuskegee Institute. So,
Oh,
so I don't think the football was a bad choice for him. It was a good choice. But anyway, he knew enough about music and had such a love of music that, and he had a little bit of saxophone going on too. He wasn't a really proficient, like virtuoso saxophonist at all, but he did have a horn. He had a tenor. And I remember when I was little, he didn't go into music. He went into technology, computers, and he was a math major in college, and he got an MBA, and he was into computers. He writes software even to this day. So, but music was always something that he would want to dedicate a lot of time to. It was like a hobby for him, and he actually made self-produced, uh, not just self, but he wrote, arranged, and produced like 3 or 4 R&B singles in the early 70s, before my sister and me came along. My sisters and me came along. So he was really into music. So by the time we came along, he had kind of gotten away from actually making music, and but he wanted to share it with us. So uh, he would take out his horn every now and again, and he'd play the song, which oddly enough, I would actually play with the composer of the song, in my early years as a saxophone player. But he'd play Sister Sadie by Horace Silver. He played
hmm.
over and over again on his tenor, and I just loved the sound of it. I loved the look of the horn. It was shiny and curvy. Excuse me. So I bugged him to get me a horn.
Hmm.
So when I was 6, he got me an alto, and he showed me how to put it together and to make a sound. And yeah, that kind of sent me on my way. Now, from the time I was 6, I learned to play a little bit on it, just like the very beginner books or whatever. But I remember for some reason, my elementary school had an instrumental program, which was, the more I think about it now, it's pretty rare. Like I was in first grade and I was playing in a school band. I was playing
Yeah, that is
saxophone in a
rare.
school band.
Yeah.
This was in East Hartford, Connecticut at the time. This was in the early 80s. So I was in the school band in East Hartford for, elementary school. So anyway, I there was music playing in the house, R&B mostly. But my dad in the course of learning how to write songs, which he did in the early 70s, he took a correspondence course from Berklee College of Music. So they sent him, I guess he paid some sort of fee, and they sent him, some materials, and he would do some assignments and mail it back and get feedback, and then, do more. So that's how he kind of he learned about music theory and about, songwriting essentially. So, why did I get on that track? Anyway, he kind of shared some of that information with me when I was, really young, but I wasn't really into the music at that point. I wasn't listening to music and I was 6, so I was more into playing baseball and playing, doing those kind of things. So my horn would sit in a corner of my bedroom collecting dust, but about the time I was 13, I was in the 8th grade. 13, or maybe I just turned 14. I was in the 8th grade, and we lived in Bloomfield, Connecticut. And there's 2 high school saxophone players in the jazz ensemble in at Bloomfield High School who were also on the football team. So I guess during the fall, they couldn't rehearse with the jazz ensemble, which rehearsed, I guess, in the evenings, like Tuesday evening or Thursdays. It was like one evening a week or something like that. So I was in 8th grade, and I was asked, because my older sister, who's a year older than me, she always kind of blazed a trail for me. She's a trumpet player, and I was always envious of her, growing up, because she has perfect pitch, which I don't have, So she was always able to do all these things. So she started on piano, then she switched to flute, and then by the time we were in middle school, she switched to trumpet. So she was playing in the high school jazz ensemble, playing trumpet. And the band director asked, if I would come to the rehearsal, because they needed a saxophone player to sub for, the kids who were out on the football team. So I did, and I had played alto up until that point. Yeah, but they didn't need any alto players. The alto players, they had 2 alto players already. They needed a tenor player. So I said, yeah, sure. They had, and another thing, that the school had some nice instruments too. They had at the time a Mark 6 and a Mark 7, Selmer Mark 6 and Mark 7 tenors. So I was able to like borrow a horn from the school, and like a really good horn, and play in the jazz ensemble. And the guys that were in the group, some of them were like 4 or 5 years older than me, right? They were seniors, and they were really welcoming. They made me cassette tapes of stuff to listen to and check out. And I just fell in love with the music. I was like 13, 14. So my dad, I would go through my dad's vinyl collection and see if there's any jazz there. And he had 3 jazz records: Cannonball Adderley, Domination; Coleman Hawkins, The Hawk Flies High; and Jerry Mulligan, The Arranger. So I wore those records out, especially Coleman Hawkins, The Hawk Flies High. That was my jam. And then he saw how much I really enjoyed it, so he bought me. And growing up in Tuscaloosa and listening to black radio there, even though he was never like a huge jazz fan, you'd hear gospel, you hear blues, you hear R&B, you hear on the black radio stations in those days, in the 50s and 60s when he grew up. So he knew who the guys were for me to check out. So he bought me a bunch of albums: Sonny Rollins and Dexter and Train and Bird. And he wanted me to have some records by the new young guy. So he bought me a Branford Marsalis record too. So, and I just devoured all those, man. Like, I just love those records, and I played them to death. And I credit my mom too, because I started to get into practicing at this point. I didn't know I wasn't taking any lessons with anybody. I just knew I wanted to sound like those records, So I tried to listen and tried to emulate them. I didn't really know what I was doing though, but she, she'd be in those days she worked as a graphic artist. She worked third shift at United Technologies, which makes airplane parts. There's a huge facility in East Hartford, Connecticut, and it'd be she would go into work at like 11, and she'd come home at 7, so she'd be home during the day in case any of us needed something while we were in school or whatever. um, so yeah, after my homework was done, I just wanted to practice, man. I just wanted to play. So this would be during the time she would need to sleep. She'd usually take a nap. She'd be up like when we got home from school. She'd get up in the early afternoon, and then she'd be up and make us dinner, and then she'd go back for a nap after dinner until she had to get up and go to work. And I'd practice, and I'd say, "Oh, mom, I'll stop now. I know you need." No, 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 don't stop. You can keep playing. It's fine. It doesn't bother me at all. Which, how can that be? It's right down the hall. But I really appreciate that, because I mean that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to play the instrument and sound like those records.
Yeah.
So around 10th grade, uh, it was the beginning of 10th grade actually. There was a program in Bloomfield Public Schools called Creative Arts Program for Secondary Students. It was like a branch of the gifted and talented. Uh, if you were involved in the arts, so what they would
Hmm.
do is there was money available to pair you up with a mentor in your artistic discipline. Amazing program. And I went to school with some amazing artists at Bloomfield High School when I was there. Anika Noni Rose, who's a tremendous actress. She was in Dreamgirls.
Hmm.
She won a Tony Award. She was in Disney's A Princess and the Frog. She was the voice of Princess Tiana. She's on. There's a BET series called The Quad. She's in that. Tremendous actress and singer, an amazing person. We were classmates in high school. Another Broadway actress, Maya Wilson, who's been on Rent for years and years. So there's a lot of really talented folks at Bloomfield at the time. So we all took part of this program, CAPS, CAPSS, CAPS, we called it. And so the teacher, the lead teacher for CAPS, her name was Yvonne Redondi, and she knew that I was a saxophone player and really into jazz music. So she said, "Well, I know there's a place a couple miles away in Hartford where this great legendary saxophone player teaches, and he actually founded it. His name is Jackie McLean. Here, let me give you this recording of his for you to check out." I'd never heard of him before. I
Hmm.
was like 15, and she gave me this recording, and I listened to it. I was like, I couldn't believe that this person lived like literally like 5-10 minutes away from where I grew up. So she arranged a meeting with me and JMac at the Artist Collective, which is this community arts school that he and his wife Dolly founded with some other local artists in 1970 when they moved up from New York City to Hartford. So she arranged this meeting, and I remember going to the collective that morning. And at the time, it's in a beautiful new building now in Hartford, but at that time, it was the collective building was an old repurposed elementary school on Clark Street in Hartford. And it was an old brick building with plaster walls and hardwood floors. So the sound just echoed. And Jackie McLean has a humongous sound all by himself. And the sound of his sound echoing throughout that building is like unbelievable. So when my mom and I pulled up in front of the Arts Collective, that it was a Saturday morning in early November 1990. We pulled up and stepped out of the car and heard that sound coming out of the building. I was like, whoa. I still remember that feeling to this day, what his sound felt like coming out of the building as we parked the car and were walking up. So I walked up, and I was so nervous, and he was actually up there giving a lesson to Abraham Burton at the time that I got there. And Abe, as you probably know, is an amazing saxophone player, and he was a very helpful person to me as well. Anyway, So he asked me to take out my horn and play something. And I think I played Billy's Bounce, the melody of it, but in the wrong key, and not an F. But I forget what I did, but it was something sad. But he was so complimentary and so warm and generous with his. He's like, son, you got to watch out. Some of those books have you playing the stuff in the wrong key. He was so nice. He said, I really hear your concept and I hear your sound, and I think you're really onto something, And so he treated me from that moment, really. Well, I met with him another time. He said, come back next Saturday, So I did, and he wrote down some stuff for me to do, like some exercises for me to do. And he said, call me. He gave me his phone number. He said, call me when you finish this. And years later, he told the story. I gave him these exercises, and I knew that it would take him like a month or a couple months to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And like 5-6 days later, I called him and said, Mr. McLean, I finished what you gave me. Like, what else? What else can I do? Like, what's the next step? And so he told me later, he said, once I heard that, I gave you all that stuff and you had done it in like a week, I knew that you were serious and that you really wanted this. So from that moment, he didn't treat me like a student, like coming for a lesson and going home and, see you later. He treated me like he treated a lot of his students. Like, he's grooming us to take what he has and keep going once he's gone, And I really felt that. And a lot of us felt that way. Steve Davis and Eric McPherson and Abraham and Antoine Roney and a lot of my peers who I've talked to, Chris Allen, Julius Tolentino, and he really poured a lot of his love and attention into all of us. Wayne Escoffrey. So I can't even describe how big of a part of my life Jackie has been, and musically, obviously, but as a human being, he was always very concerned about me as a man, about me as my girlfriend at the time. She's my wife. She's been my wife now for 20 years, but we dated and started dating in my senior year of high school, and we went to college. We were at Hart together the whole time, and he was concerned. He and Dolly had started a family very early in their lives, so he was just concerned that he didn't want us to kind of have too much responsibility, like having children really early, and having to kind of forego some of my musical dreams to take care of family, So he was like, he was really on top of me about that too, and always making sure that I was doing the right things in college, not just in his classes, but in my other classes too. The classes maybe at that time I wasn't kind of given 110%. Maybe I'd skip some, I'd skip a theory class here and there, an ear training class here or there, and if he caught wind of it, if he caught wind that I was playing hooky from somebody's class, boy, he would come down on me. He's like, listen, man, you got your whole life, or if I missed class to play a gig or something like that, he's like, don't do that. You got the whole rest of your life to go out and worry about making money and playing gigs. Right now, while you're in school, you just need to focus on this here, Yeah. So he was a mentor, a father figure, not just a teacher. So I really appreciated that about him. And he was very honest too. I think my first year at Hart, I was getting called to play a lot of gigs in the area, and I guess, people were impressed by my playing in the local region. And he pulled me into his office and he said, son, a lot of people really think very highly of your playing, He said, but let me tell you something. You've got a long way to go before you can sleep. Practice, practice, practice. And man, like that was like exactly what I needed to hear. Because when you're 19, if you're someone's calling you for $100 gig and you're like, oh man, this is great. And he was like, no man, this isn't like what you see around you. This small little pond, that's not your destiny. Like you've got to shoot way higher, right? And you've got to prepare yourself to get there. So don't be satisfied with, little accolades here in and around Hartford. That's not what you're looking for, You got to step it up. So I appreciated that.
Something that I tell my students um, is there's no such thing as regional excellence.
Mhm.
You know, especially in the world we live in today, where everything is so connected.
Sure.
Um, and I mean, you can get on YouTube and you can see some really incredible stuff. And the fact is that other people have the same access
That's right.
to seeing that stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I mean, okay, you're hot stuff in Columbus,
Mhm.
but that that ain't nothing. What does that mean? But
Yeah.
um,
Which is good in a lot of ways.
yeah,
You can get instant feedback as to where you're at because you have access to everything.
yeah,
I think a drawback to that is that I don't know, and maybe it's really not that big of a deal, but when I talked about records, like not tracks, but records, like you got if you have a vinyl record, like you can't listen to that in your car. You
no,
can't listen to it walking to and from somewhere. You got to sit and you got to deal with that. If you're gonna really listen to it, you got to be still and make that a priority. You can't do it while you're doing something else. Maybe you can clean and listen to records, which we used to do on Saturday mornings. My mom would put on Luther Vandross or Lou Rawls or Peebo Bryson or somebody, and we'd be cleaning the house listening to that. But it's a different thing. Like when you have a record, you have a vinyl, you have the liner notes, who's on the record, when
yeah,
it was recorded, where it was recorded, who recorded it.
yeah,
A lot of times you get insights on what the artist was thinking and doing, and but when you're just going through playlists, although that's what we're dealing with, that's what we have, you don't get that all that other information. So I think some of the perspective gets lost.
yeah. I mean, even even when we were dealing with CDs, you still had an artwork.
You
You'd
did,
open it
yeah.
up, you'd fold the thing out, and there was space to have some liner notes, some other information, a context for the project,
Mm-hmm.
all of that kind of stuff. Um, but certainly, obviously, when you have something that's this size, all of the space that's right there, just to, I mean, and just the sort of tactile holding the record, the record cover, just having something physical that takes
Yeah.
up some space,
Mm-hmm.
that has an aesthetic. It has a certain artistic aesthetic to it. The artwork that's on it, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just all of that stuff. And uh, um, so having access to all of this music and all of this stuff, it's like, do you know it or do you Google know it? you know,
Yeah, that's true.
and if
That's true.
if somebody has to ask you if you know something or Google know it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that means you don't know it. Because knowing how to ask Google for directions to figure out what you're looking for there's a skill associated with that, but it's not the same skill as we should actually be after as far
Sure.
as really absorbing the music.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea of passive versus active listening. And um, my wife, um, God bless her, and she loves music too, but she can use music to go to sleep too. I can't go to sleep with music's on.
No.
I am hearing
Yeah.
everything that's going on,
Sure.
and and it's I don't, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but I don't really listen for pleasure. You know, it's active listening. I want to know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Music is my job.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to know how I can do what it is that
Mm-hmm.
they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so my brain is always on that way. I remember, I think Branford said something to the same effect, like that he doesn't listen for pleasure, or
Mm-hmm.
or something. And it's the same idea. It's like when the music is on, my ears are on. I'm trying to pay attention to what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, and I think too often, maybe because we have access to too much stuff now, it's easy to kind of, the stuff kind of goes in one ear and out the other ear,
Sure. Sure.
and maybe we don't value it as much.
Mm-hmm.
I think for folks that are our age, I think that we had access to actual records and actual CDs and like that, and the paradigm hadn't changed yet. So we can sort of reflect back on that, and so then we have access to all of the stuff. But I think it's probably easier for us to actually value that for what it's worth
Sure.
than
Sure.
someone that just was dumped all the stuff that they didn't have to pay for, that they
Right.
didn't have to work for or anything. It's
Yeah.
just right there.
Yeah. How do you value something that's always been free? You know, how do you put a value, like, you know, I'm sure you're the same way. When I was in high school and college, most of my disposable income went to buying records, you know, buying CDs, and or buying blank tapes so I
Yep.
could dub my friends' records or
Oh
CDs on
goodness.
it, you know? So like you had to, you valued it because, man, you had to, like, those weren't cheap. Like if you bought a new release in 1994, 1991, you're paying 16, 17, $18 for it. One CD,
Yep.
10 tracks. You're paying a
Yep.
lot of money. I mean, you don't even pay that for a month of Apple Music now, you know?
No. No.
So yeah, it, like, and learning all the information on that, you know, but you know, I have students, I'm sure you do too. I have students that are doing stuff that I was just barely scratching the surface of when I was their age. You know, it's just because they have all this sort of information, you know, at their disposal. So I think it's a good thing. I just think, and I hate to sound like the old guy in the room, but I just think it's a all this information at our fingertips is a really good thing. I think you need someone our age to kind of put it in perspective, right? And remind kids, like, it's not good enough. Oh yeah, okay. So for juries this semester, we're doing Lazy Bird. Okay, well, it's John Coltrane. Who else is on the record? I don't know. You know, that's not good enough. You know, you got to research. You got to do a couple more clicks. It's not that difficult. Find out
Right.
who's on the record, when it was recorded. You know, what other tunes are on the record. You know, so because it was meant as a statement, it wasn't meant as a track.
Right.
It was
Right.
meant as part of a statement.
That's right.
You know, so.
Yeah. The whole kind of the track or single kind of terminology that works well for popular music,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what we're doing. And certainly jazz tunes and songs out of the American Songbook have been popular,
Hmm.
but that wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to become popular. The goal was to say something meaningful, and then if people dig it, that's great, you know. And it's not to sort of maximize the number of people that you can sell this thing to by sort of lowering the common denominator down to something that everybody can relate to. That was never the thing. You can do that in a bite-sized track, 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, or whatever it is. But that's not what our music is about. Yeah, you need context, and then there's the whole thing about like listening to players in different periods. Listen to early Coltrane versus Atlantic or um, Prestige Coltrane or Impulse Coltrane you know or post classic quartet Coltrane. Coltrane when he was with Miles the first time versus Coltrane when he came back to Miles. Coltrane with Monk. It's like he sounds different,
Yeah.
and so yeah, documentation,
Yeah.
that whole thing.
And just speaking about him, can you imagine all of that? All those periods you just mentioned were within 12 years,
Yeah,
between 1955 and 1967. All
yeah,
that innovation, all that was within 12. That's like a 12 years is like that, you know? It's
man.
unbelievable. I'm sorry.
I have to tell you, man. So, and I started when I was 6. Also, I got a saxophone when I was 6. My dad was a saxophone player.
Hmm.
Um, so we had that in common. Also, my dad was a had his own record company and was a
Mm.
producer, and he produced some R&B.
Wow.
So so that we had that in
Wow, that's
common.
funny.
Um, I also was playing in like the jazz band at school. I was younger than all the other kids,
Hmm.
and all that whole thing. And so I was listening to you talk, and I was like, yeah, it's like, yeah,
That's
okay, yeah,
uncanny.
yeah, I could, yeah, I could, yeah, yeah. I knew I liked
Yeah,
this guy,
yeah,
you know.
right.
Uh, but what was I gonna say? What were we just talking about? We were just talking
Train.
about, yeah.
Coltrane. Yeah.
Okay, so in my house was all this great music playing all the time, and my mom, I think, had more control of the music that I was hearing than my dad, because my mom was a stay-at-home mom,
Hmm.
and my dad got home at like 5:30 or whatever, and then some of the stuff that he was listening to, or he wanted me to listen to, that stuff would go on, and he had all these great records, all the Miles stuff, Paquito de Rivera, um, uh, I mean, goodness, I mean, just
Yeah.
all this great stuff, all the stuff that you would expect,
Hmm.
in someone that really knows the music. And so I would listen to that stuff, and I was hearing Coltrane, uh, because he was on a lot of these records, and but honestly, I couldn't really process Coltrane. Like
Mm.
so my first guy was Sonny Stitt.
Hmm.
That's all I wanted to deal with was Sonny Stitt.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I got to college that I started to become like able to like digest Coltrane. And I'll tell you, Coltrane kind of ruined me for listening to other players for a while.
Mm.
It took a while for me to
Mm.
be able to um, not be like critical of other players.
Mm.
Like, well, Coltrane would have done it like this. Hey, man, but this cat ain't as bad as Coltrane. But look, Coltrane he can play ballads. Look,
Mm.
he can play, sheets of
Yeah.
sound. He can do,
Yeah.
he can do this, he can do that. So he's a great composer.
Mm.
He's a great band leader.
Mm.
I the spiritual thing. A love supreme, right?
Yeah.
All of that. So it was it almost got to the point where now I was able to come out of that partially because of Kenny Garrett,
Hmm.
and then players like Michael Brecker and basically a lot of players that were very influenced by Coltrane. Um, and But yeah, those are if I had to nail it down to two big influences, my two biggest influences would be Sonny Stitt and John Coltrane. How about you?
Yeah.
Who do you feel like your biggest influences are?
Wow. There's a lot. Um, I Wow, there's a lot. I'd say Lester Young, big one.
No,
Dexter, big one. Bird,
no,
Sonny Stitt, yeah. Sonny Rollins, huge Sonny Rollins, you know. Train, of course, huge. Wayne Shorter,
mm,
Joe Henderson, huge influence. Stanley Turrentine, big influence. And then I really got into Brantford. Obviously, he was one of the younger guys, younger, relative to when I was a teenager first starting. Brantford, always loved him. Kenny Garrett, Joe Lovano, Michael Brecker.
mm,
When I was in college, when I was in high school, Josh Redman
yeah,
was hit the scene. I always loved Josh and Mark Turner and Chris Potter and all these guys. So yeah, there's a lot of saxophone players in there. But I would say the ones I spent the most time over the years checking out: um, Bird, Sonny Rollins, Dexter, Sonny Stitt, Train, Wayne
yeah,
Shorter. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Joe
And
Henderson. Yeah.
and the thing is that all of those names that you said, of course, I mean, I, you can't help but be, powerfully influenced
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
those players. I mean, that's the canon of scripture, right? I mean,
Sure.
you have to do that stuff.
And Jackie McLean. Why did I forgot J Mac, man.
Yeah.
So much of his playing has been so influential and so
Mm.
powerful for me. So yeah, Jackie's right up there. I mean, I have 3 album covers on my office wall and right behind my desk. So when I'm going to my desk before I sit down and take my horn out, I look at those 3 album covers. It's one of the Bird albums on Verve.
Mm.
It's a Love Supreme, and then Jackie's album Let Freedom Ring. So I get inspiration by look, and that's the one that Jackie wrote on the back of it: practice, practice, practice. So
Yeah.
man, it just gets me all fired up, getting ready to start my day, looking at those 3 album covers. So
Um. So, uh, so there's been a couple. I mean, I I just feel so blessed to be able to play music for a living, like to be a musician. I I I would be totally miserable. I don't know. I don't know. I I don't know that there is something else that is as big as music to totally occupy any direction conceivably that I would even want to go. It's such a huge thing, and it's such a huge blessing to be able to do what it is that we do. To
yeah, it is.
teach, to play, um, um, and uh, goodness. And I think about there's a few moments uh, that were and that are critical. Um, One of them for me was recently I started not all the time, but I've been touring with the Count Basie Orchestra,
Great.
and that's been a really cool thing.
Yeah.
Another thing, which because of who my biggest influence is, um, in the whole spirituality thing and just fusing a lot of things together. So I'm the minister of music uh, at Second Baptist Church in
Mm-hmm.
Columbus. It's a historic church, um, the first minister of the church was an abolitionist minister.
Oh,
So it's like 184 years old.
wow.
And so there's a lot of history.
Mhm.
And the minister there, like I said, he's a great singer. He's a fine musician. He's a good piano player. I mean, he was a minister of music before he uh, decided, or before he answered the call. And uh, he allowed me to set a service up. We tweaked the service in a way. It was during Black History Month,
Mhm.
so that we could do a Love Supreme, the entire suite uninterrupted
Wow.
in the church, which
That's
is
awesome.
like its native habitat,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was like a really special kind of thing, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
tied a lot of things together for me. So I'm saying that to ask, what were some moments that were kind of seminal moments like that, and maybe even some projects that maybe you're working on now, or um, the sort of realizing of a project maybe that you've done in the past that was really like a profound moment for you.
Mm. Well, there's been several. There's an album that I did called Mission Statement. It was about 12 years ago. We recorded it late 2008. Xavier's on it. Ruben Rogers, Eric Harland, Stefan Harris is on a track, and Lage Lund plays guitar. And that was the first recording I had done in some time. It wasn't my first recording as leader. It was probably my, goodness, sixth maybe. But it was the first one I had done in some time that I felt like I had the proper amount of time uh, to record. I got exactly who I wanted to get, um, and we had the proper amount of time to kind of play through the material and to work it out on stage and then work it out in the studio. And everybody played so great on it, and it was, for me, that was a special moment, that recording. Another one, uh, a couple of years later, we played. I did recording live at Smalls, and there's some moments on there that I think I listen back, and I'm just amazed at what happened. uh, Xavier's on that one too. Ugona, Okegwo, and Greg Hutchinson. And there's some moments on that recording that still blow me away. And obviously, losing my daughter to gun violence in 2012 at Sandy Hook School. Um, After about 5 weeks of not even thinking about playing music or writing, being approached by Norman Chesky of Chesky Records. And mind you, like during that time, we were approached by, my family and me were approached by thousands of tens of thousands of people, friends, family, well wishers, just to offer their support and their prayers, and offer assistance in a variety of different ways. But there are also people looking to, there was a lot of negative people that had gotten in contact with us, and people that were kind of looking to make a buck off of our tragedy. So when I got this call from Norman Chesky, actually, speaking of the Davises, Xavier Davis called me, and he said, Jim, there's a guy named Norman Chesky who wants to get in touch with you, and I just want to make sure it was okay with you before I gave him your information. He wants to talk about making a record. And I was like, wow, great. Does he want to exploit my daughter and exploit our whatever? But something said, get in touch with him, let him have your information. So I talked to Norman, and he said, when I heard that a jazz musician's daughter was one of the victims, I looked up your name, and in addition to Chesky Records, they have a business called HD Tracks, where it's like an audio files iTunes. You can download albums and tracks, but in high definition audio. I think it's 9624, kind of high
Oh, yeah,
resolution
yeah, yeah,
audio.
yeah.
So he said, I looked, and we actually sell your Mission Statement album on HD Tracks. So I felt like there's a connection there, and I wanted to reach out to you because of that connection and offer to produce, to finance and produce a record. It doesn't have to be now, it can be in 5 years. But I really feel like after listening to your Mission Statement album, I feel like when and if you're able, you could really, do a beautiful recording uh, as a tribute to your daughter. And I thought it over, and the record business, especially since in this millennium, starting in 2000, maybe even a little earlier, with the whole pirating and the record business has kind of been stood on its ear, and they've record companies have come and gone, and what we used to know as the major labels, like there were 6 of them when I was, first uh, kind of learning as a player in the early 90s and mid 90s, and that was your goal, right? You wanted to get hooked up with one of these major labels. That was the prize,
Mm.
but they all went, most of them went by the wayside once they all, Napster and so on and so forth. People were sharing files for free. So fast forward to now, this is early 2013. I'm like, the record business is taking a huge hit. Like, who is out there offering to fund a record, you know, for free? And he said, we don't want to make a dime off of this record. He said, we would love nothing more than the proceeds to go to your family and to any charities that you have set up in your daughter's name. Like, we're not, and if you don't believe me, we're going to have our lawyers draft up an
Huh.
agreement and send it to you saying that no matter what this album does financially, we're not going to profit from it at all. We just want to give this opportunity to you. So I was blown away. So that's the album I did called Beautiful Life. Um, and those are some amazing moments in those sessions. I mean, so much generosity. All the musicians, Christian McBride, Kenny Barron, Kurt Elling, Cyrus, Greene Rosnes, Lewis Nash, uh, everybody, the Hartford Symphony string section, everybody did the record for an honorarium, a small honorarium. They were happy to donate because they knew that a lot of the money would be going to the charity that we set up in our daughter's name. So what an amazing gift and outpouring of love. So those were some moments in my career that have really stuck out.
That had to be a really emotional time in the studio, even trying to play.
You know, um, it's interesting. Like, the for me, the most emotional part, I was in tears writing the songs,
Mm.
and arranging some of the songs. I mean, literally bawling tears, just remembering my little girl and just feeling the weight of what had happened to her and what had happened to our family, and what we were dealing with. In the studio, though, it's like this, the process of being a musician kicks in, and you're
Mm.
so the studio sessions, uh there were a lot of them for that album. I would say the emotion varied by session. So the first session was with the core group, which was Renee Rosnes, Christian McBride, and Lewis Nash. So it was a quartet session, and that for me it was beautiful. But it was like many other recording sessions. Like, I had, we rehearsed the tunes, and I had an idea of what I wanted, and and we all got together, and they played so amazingly, and they were so generous with their time, and but then we did a bunch of smaller sessions over the next year. You know, the album from start to finish took about a year to do. So I did duet sessions. I did some duo sessions with Kenny Barron. A duo session one day with Kenny Barron. We did 2 tunes, and that was unbelievable. You know, I did one. The first track on the album is a duo with Pat Metheny. Again, unbelievable. You know, for me, the most emotional session was when I went up back to Winnipeg in the fall of 13, and David Chesky actually had this idea of having a children's choir on the record. And David and Norman run Chesky Records. David's a great musician and a pianist and composer too. So he mentioned that over the phone, and I was just taken aback. I was like, wow, that's an amazing idea and so fitting. And I was thinking, well, who could I go to? Like, you know, here, like we were back in Connecticut at this point. Should I find a children's choir that already exists here? And I thought to myself, no, like, I don't want kids that never met my daughter singing about her. They never met her. So I want to go back to where kids know her. They knew her. So we went back to my kids' elementary school when we lived in Winnipeg, because we had just moved to Connecticut 4 months, moved back home to Connecticut 4 months before she was killed. So we had lived in Winnipeg for the 3 years prior. So her classmates there, like, they knew her. So we had a bunch of her classmates and kids. The school was school goes up to Linden Christian School in Winnipeg. It goes from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. But we had kids, you know, from kindergarten through. My son is 2 years older, so through his grade at the time, so third or fourth grade, in the choir, and they were singing, and it was, oh my goodness, I had to leave the room. You know, I was in tears just seeing those beautiful little faces that, you know, I was used to seeing with my daughter. They were her friends, you know, and so those moments were really emotional. Conducting the strings, you know, the Hartford Symphony strings, and just hearing, you know, I'm sure, Sean, if you have had the opportunity to write for strings, like,
Oh yeah.
like going like this, and
Yeah.
hearing, you know,
Yeah.
it's an amazing sound and amazing feeling. So yeah, that was pretty awesome. So yeah, there's a lot of sessions that went into that recording, and but they varied in emotion, I would say.
Thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah.
Um, so I I interviewed uh, one of my fellow alumnus, uh, John Wojciechowski,
Yeah.
uh, and you and him have a competition in common, uh,
Oh boy. Yeah.
along with uh, he wasn't a finalist. Uh,
I could tell you, there's a lot of guys. There was John Ellis was there,
uh,
a guy from Florida named George Allegier. There was Charlie Young from DC,
uh-huh.
Joel Fromm, my
Joel
man
Fromm.
from
That's it.
Hartford. Chris
Yeah.
Jensen, also from Binghamton, New York, but had lived in the Hartford area for years. He was actually Jackie's TA at Hart. He was one of the semifinalists. Who else? Of course, John Gordon, Wojciechowski,
Mm.
uh, Jay Branford. Uh, yeah, it's a lot of. There's 13 of us. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course, you know, the Thelonious Monk uh, competition is what we're talking about. And what year was that again?
1996.
96.
Yeah.
and Wojciechowski was third,
Mm-hmm.
and you were second in that
Mm-hmm.
competition. Who won that competition?
John Gordon.
John Gordon.
Yeah, and we became really good friends. We were the two alto players in Harry Connick Jr.'s big band from like 98 until like two through 98 through early 2000, I think. So
Mm.
yeah, John, and we still talk to this day, you know.
So what was that experience like? I mean, you've made some lifelong, friendships out of that. But what was the actual competition like?
Oh my goodness, I've never been so nervous in my life.
Hmm.
Up on stage, oh man, that was I was 21. I was in my senior year at Hart, my fall semester of my senior year at Hart. I was the youngest one there, uh, probably the least experienced one there. Um, and I got up. I was in this. There's 13 semifinalists. There's two halves to the semifinals. Everybody got up and played three tunes that you sent earlier. So you decided, with I think Don Sickler had something to do with preparing the parts to hand to the rhythm section. So you had to like send all your tunes that you wanted to do to Don Sickler ahead of time. Um, One of them had to be a monk composition, and one had to be there's a medium tempo, a ballad, and an up tempo. One of which had to be a monk composition.
Hmm.
So I chose tunes that I had been playing. In those days, I played every weekend in Boston. I would drive up from Hartford to Boston to play with the house band at Wally's. Wally's was a kind of a historic black-owned club in Boston. It's still there to this day and still operating. Obviously, not now during the pandemic, but we play there every weekend. So the leader of the band was John Lampkin, drummer, who was from Maryland and lives in Maryland. Live in Maryland now. Reuben Rogers was the bass player. Aaron Goldberg was the piano player, and Darren Barrett and Jeremy Pelt were the trumpet players. They would, when Darren was out of town, Jeremy would play. So we played every weekend. So with these great musicians, we developed kind of a repertoire. So I chose tunes that I'd been playing with them. 26-2. I always loved Invitation. I played that, and for my ballad, I played Panonica, and that was also the monk composition. So I remember getting up on stage, the rhythm section. It was surreal. Like my heroes, Lewis Nash, Christian McBride, and Kenny Barron were the rhythm section. So I got up there with them, and I was so nervous. I remember I carried a bottle of Poland Spring water, and I said, no matter what happens, like you got to drink some of this water before you count off the first tune, so you don't get cotton mouth, and then get all dried and not be able to make the reed vibrate. So I remember my hands shaking as I got the water. I made sure I drank it. The auditorium was silent. I was, put my water down and count off 26-2. And from the first note, they just made me feel so relaxed. Like the rhythm section was with me. Like it's like it was fun. Those three tunes, like it just sailed right by, and I got the feedback later. I forget from whom. Maybe Jimmy Heath or the judges. That this is the nerve-wracking part. The judges were Jimmy Heath, Wayne Shorter, Josh Redman, Joe Lovano, and my teacher Jackie McLean, who I wanted to make proud of me so bad,
Hmm.
So I got some feedback later that Jim, when you played those, it didn't sound like a contestant playing with a rhythm section. It said it sounded like that was your band that you had for a long time. It felt like a group, which I really appreciate that, because I was really trying to listen and just play with them. So yeah, that was that, and then the finals. I remember again, the whole weekend was surreal. Like it was the first monk competition that uh, had coincided with ABC TV had done this special called "A Celebration of America's Music"
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. So they filmed this huge TV special and aired it. Uh, maybe a week or so later, but the finals was on the same night that they filmed this TV special on the same stage. So the finals like a prelude to this TV special being filmed. So it was you had all these stars around all week, and it was nerve wracking going down for a meal in the hotel we were staying in, and there's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and there's Pat Metheny, and there's Herbie Hancock, and I'm this 21-year-old kid, man. I'm just starstruck, and then you go to the elevator, and then who's coming out of the elevator but Stevie Wonder, and I'm just it was just surreal, man. It was but yeah, the finals, Bill Cosby was the MC and Billy D. Williams was there, and it was just too much. It was like overload, sensory overload. To be all around all these stars and all these great musicians, and but yeah, it was a big learning experience. They told us we had 10 minutes for the finals, and I thought, well, I really would. I think it would be better to do three tunes, like
Mm-hmm.
like medium tempo ballad, up tempo. But I'm not gonna have time in 10 minutes. I don't want to get disqualified because I'm taking too long.
Mm-hmm.
So I just picked two tunes. In hindsight, I would have played three, and just stretched out and had some fun. But I didn't. Um, but yeah, it was quite a weekend to be honest. It was unbelievable.
So you were talking about uh, in Boston playing with Aaron Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, so Aaron and I were selected as the what was that Stan Getz Clifford Brown Fellowship,
Mm-hmm.
that business. It was
Mm-hmm.
the same year,
Oh wow.
um, and so we played together. Now I haven't talked to Aaron since then. Actually, well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe once or something
Mm-hmm.
uh, since then. No, no. You know what? I think I saw him at like an IAJE conference or
Mm-hmm.
something a few years later or something. Um, and this was the year before they started having that group play on the main stage as an opening act for one of
Right.
the whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
it was the year before they started doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I haven't talked to Aaron for a while. It's what's interesting about Aaron is um, as great a player as he is, um, uh, he was not the best. He was not the best player. But this guy has worked his butt off and has turned himself into a terrific player.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, Aaron's the real deal, man. He's
it's a bad dude.
yeah, he
So,
sure is. Yeah, I just listened the other day to my first record as a leader. It's called "Introducing Jimmy Greene" on Crisscross Records from 1997, and just hearing Aaron play on it, just he sounds every bit as good today as he did then. It's like,
yeah.
man, he was really playing some beautiful piano.
And I'm trying to gauge this. So in 1996, you were 21.
Yep.
So let me think here. So what year were you born in?
75.
Okay, yeah. So I guess I'm a year older than you then. We're like a year apart.
Okay.
And for whatever reason in my head, I had that turned around. I was
Okay.
thinking you were a little bit older than I am.
Oh, okay.
But um,
Yeah, there's a lot of us around the same age.
yeah, but same.
Yeah, we're all Aaron's the same age, 74. Ruben 74. I think Eric Harlan might be a little younger. I think he's 76 or 70, maybe 77, something like that. Yeah. But I think once you turn 30, it doesn't even matter anymore. It's whatever, man. Uh,
Well, that and start having kids. The
yeah,
kids is the
yeah,
thing that really
yeah.
changes the dynamic, because yeah, something profound changes up here.
Oh yeah.
Um, so there's so many other things we could talk about. We could just keep going and going.
I
Um,
didn't even notice what time it is, man. All
yeah,
right.
yeah. I mean, uh, we could keep going, but I
Yeah,
think maybe we could pause it here at least, and maybe
yeah.
sometime in the future
Sounds
we can
good.
continue. But thanks so much for your time.
Ah, it's my
Um,
pleasure.
in the future, I do want to ask you about what it is that you practice,
Okay.
so that we can
All
maybe
right.
make that a teaser
All right.
for a future conversation.
Sounds
Well,
good.
well, God bless you and your family. I pray, for our community, and I pray, uh, I pray that we get out of this thing as
Yes,
soon as
indeed.
possible and get
Yeah.
back on the stage playing for an
Yes.
audience.
Yes. I appreciate you, Sean. Thank you, man.
All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
Talk to you soon.
All right now.
All right.